It is Thursday, December 30th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 17 Championship Week Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Small, and this is it, Jared. For most of us, there's still some leagues that play through the end of the season now that it's Week 18, but for most of us, this is it. We're making all our final lineup decisions, and, it makes every decision more important, but it's not time to start making different decisions just because it's Championship Week.
And your team's obviously good if you got here, so you shouldn't be, having to dig down into the fringes too much. Although it's obviously been a grind. Congrats if you're still alive in season-long leagues, because it's to me it's been the most challenging fantasy season ever, just with all the COVID issues on top of all the usual injury stuff.
And you'll probably hear plenty of start your studs at this point, but that's antiquated. I mean, we can't. You don't want to overthink it and sit somebody that's gotten you here, but you also don't want to ignore what's been happening over the past month and a half and just say, well, I drafted this guy in round 3, round 4. I'm going to stick with him. And if I lose with him, then so be it. Because there are some of those guys that don't look nearly so attractive. So that's why we're going to keep going game by game, just like we do every week on the Thursday podcast. We'll talk about guys who might be bigger names that don't belong in your lineup this week, as well as some guys that we probably haven't talked about enough to this point, at least in recent shows, who might belong in your lineups this week. Let's start. No Thursday game this week, which is awesome. I love that. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm glad to have a full week before Sunday so we can actually get to every single game, just thought-wise before any of them kick off.
It's nice for lineup setting. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself tonight. I might do some underdog playoff drafts and then go to bed early. Might be nice.
That's the thing, is there are drafts that you can do. You can take more time to set DFS lineups if you just need the football fix. There are 127 different streaming services too. Watch something that's not football and then save it for Sunday. I'm excited to have no Thursday night football, but we'll get to when we do have football. We'll start with Miami at Tennessee. What an inglorious place to start it. On Sunday, Titans by 3.5 points. Over under is 40.5. And Jared, for me, it's tough to believe in anything beyond Jalen Waddle on the Miami side after the way Monday night in New Orleans went. 46% target share for the rookie coming off the COVID list. 0 targets for Devontae Parker. Are you looking at anything beyond Jalen Waddle in this lineup this week?
I mean, that was obviously a super conservative game plan for Miami, which was probably smart considering, Ian Book couldn't do anything. But I don't know, to me, just thinking longer term, it kind of said a little bit about how they feel about Tua. Like, they were, running Wildcat and pulling him for Brissett, and just, it was a super conservative game plan. So I don't expect the same this week. Tennessee's going to push Miami. Tennessee's favored in this game, obviously. I think it's a decent spot for the passing game. The Titans are 10th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, but they're 27th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. They're 31st in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. That's largely because they're second in situation neutral pass rate against. So it's, teams tend to go pass heavy against Tennessee. The Dolphins have been a pass leaning offense for most of the season. I don't think Tua is like a strong quarterback one play. But I think, Waddle's an excellent play. He's a must start. And I do think Devontae Parker is still in the, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 mix. He had 4+ catches in all 7 of his games prior to last week. He was still out there for 85% of the pass plays last week. So, he's still clearly, I think, that, the number 2 option in this passing game, especially with, Mike Gesicki kind of tailing off lately. So, Parker, not a must start, obviously, but I do think he's still an option if you're searching for that wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4.
Yeah, you can certainly say that a conservative offense made sense in that game, and it obviously didn't hurt them. But, I mean, you could also say the matchup gives you a chance to play around with whatever you want on offense, because the Saints were clearly incapable of actually making you pay once they got the ball back. So to me, it would have been a good chance to, try a bit more downfield stuff. We got one long completion to Mac Hollins, but not a whole lot else to actually like beyond that. So I agree. It kind of makes me wonder about what they think of Tua long-term, but for this week, I agree with what you said on Tua. He's not in the top 12 for me. He certainly could wind up putting up like a low end of the top 12 score, but there are other guys to like ahead of him in that range. And Devontae Parker, I'm going to try to throw out what happened on Monday night, because there was a report, I think from Omar Kelly, not really a report, but more of like this is what I see, of Devontae Parker spending a good bit of time with trainers ahead of the game. We haven't heard anything about an injury. He's not on the injury report this week. So I think it's just a matter of them not feeling like they needed to test Marshawn Lattimore, who might have been the best offensive player that the Saints had in that game had they taken shots at Devontae Parker. He still played. Parker played less than he did the week before, but his 71% target share was really right in line with his previous games. So I'm going to look more at what he did before that game. He had topped 60 receiving yards in 4 straight before that New Orleans game. He has not fallen short of 4 catches all year. So Devontae Parker in the low end of that wide receiver 3 range looks like actually one of the safer bets among those types of guys this week, I think.
Yeah, I think you can expect, 6 to 8 targets from him. And again, Tennessee 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wideouts.
And the Titans have been tough on run D. I mean, they rate well that way. For the course of the year, it's the 3rd toughest scoring matchup for running backs on the year by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. They've also been putting up strong DVOA ratings in run defense lately. So it's the kind of game that should push Miami toward passing, as you alluded to.
Yes, I would try to avoid the backfield. If I think Duke Johnson is the best bet. He'd be my pick to lead in carries, but it's still Myles Gaskin getting quite a bit of work in the passing game. We saw Phillip Lindsay, split carries with Duke Johnson last week, so that's a mess. Tennessee also has been tough against tight ends. They're 6th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders has them 4th in tight end coverage, and Mike Gesicki now. Outside the top 16 tight ends in 4 of his last 5 games. Even the other game, he finished tight end 9. So he's been struggling lately. He's just 14th in expected fantasy points per game over the last 5. So the usage has been tailing off too. So I think Gesicki's still right, borderline top 12 in our rankings. Just because the position is so weak. But he's not as strong as a play as he looked like he was a month ago.
Yeah, because he's a tight end is the only reason that he's actually in the mix, because he's on a cold streak. He's all over the place in terms of targets. So he's certainly not out of the mix. And he's actually done okay in red zone opportunities. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 7, but has seen 7 red zone targets since then, according to Pro Football Reference for the year. Gesicki still leads Dolphins in red zone targets. So he could get a score in this game. He does not match up just like a traditional tight end. So the negative matchup for tight end scoring shouldn't affect him as much, but certainly not an exciting play at this point because of what we've gotten lately. On the Tennessee side, the numbers make Miami look scary as a pass defense, but you got to check their opponents over that stretch where they've really loaded up. Since week 9, starting with week 9, the Texans, the Ravens, the Jets, the Panthers, the Giants, then the bye, then the Jets again, then the Saints with Ian Book. Right before that, the pass defense rated among the worst in the league in DVOA. And looking back from that week 8 game just ahead of that stretch, we had Buffalo, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Tampa, Indy, Vegas, negative DVO ratings in pass defense in all of those matchups. So I think overall you count this as a neutral at worst passing matchup for Titans offensive players.
Yeah, and that's where our adjusted fantasy points is so, I think, important to look at, because it's adjusting for those opponents. So Miami's actually 25th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So I'm not worried about this matchup at all for AJ Brown. Obviously healthy. Last week had the massive game on Thursday. I like that he's going to have extra rest coming into this game too. After playing on Thursday night, Julio Jones and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine on the COVID list. We'll see if those guys get back. But Julio is going to dominate Titans targets regardless of who else is out there.
And it's easy to say start A.J. Brown, but we're getting to the point now where the best teams are still available. So there will be some teams that have, a bunch of good receivers to choose from. Yeah. I heard from one customer last night who has 4 wideouts. He has to choose 3. These 4 guys all rank among our top 12 for the week. It's A.J. Brown, Antonio Brown, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb. And, what you want to do is not have to sit any of those guys. So there's one super flex spot where a 4th wide receiver could take the place of either Trey Lance or Russell Wilson. I think it's a strong enough group that you consider that. You almost always go quarterback, and our projections say go for Trey Lance if he's playing. I think if Lance doesn't play, I would play the 4th wide receiver over Russell Wilson with the way things have been going for Wilson. Otherwise, to me, among those 4, A.J. Brown is the one that I'd be most scared to not play after what he did last Thursday against the 49ers.
Yeah, to me, Antonio Brown would be the first guy in, but Brown would be the second guy in. I would have to reluctantly sit CeeDee Lamb. We'll get to the Cowboys, but that's with all their receivers healthy. I think he has the lowest target floor at this point.
Yeah, that was my recommendation as well. Back to the Titans, Deontay Foreman is certainly an option, but his past 4 weeks kind of show what he is. So over that span, let's go backwards starting from last Thursday. 9 carries, 17 yards, a touchdown on the ground against the 49ers, who are a tough rushing matchup. So clearly touchdown reliant there. 22 carries for 108 against the Steelers the week before that, 13 for 47 and a touchdown against Jacksonville, 19 for 109 against the Patriots. So when it's a positive rushing matchup, he can certainly take advantage of it, but he also needs the Titans to have a lead to give him those carries. So Foreman's an option. He stops well short of being a safe option, though.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen, it's a 3-man committee in Tennessee's backfield with Jeremy McNichols and Dontre Hilliard alongside Foreman. Foreman's gotten about half the running back carries over the last 3 weeks, 44 carries for Foreman, 41 total for McNichols and Hilliard. Tennessee is home favorites here, slight home favorites, so maybe game flow will go in his favor. I think Foreman's a running back 3, not a guy I'm super excited to use.
Yeah, and Ryan Tannehill, to me, doesn't have the ceiling to be worth chasing. It's an upside matchup, but if Tennessee jumps out to a lead, I think they take the air out of the ball and they limit his passing volume.
Yeah, I think he's a nice quarterback too, with Brown back and the rushing ability. But I think you should be able to do better as a quarterback 1.
Mm-hmm. Atlanta at Buffalo next. The Bills by 14.5 at home and over under 44 points. And on the Bills side first, we get Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis back from the COVID list because the NFL couldn't deal with another game of Cole Beasley being on the sideline, changed its rules. So now we get these guys back from one of the best passing matchups in the league. Cole Beasley last 2 times out, 11 targets, 8 targets. We had the big game for Isaiah McKenzie last week in Cole Beasley's absence. I like Beasley this week in this matchup against Atlanta, especially because the Falcons, one good player on defense is AJ Terrell playing the outside corner spot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the argument for any of these Bills is that, they have the highest implied total on the week. They'd be my bet to score the most points. So all these guys have decent touchdown upside. But man, I'm just not exactly sure how this is going to work. I think Beasley's going to retake over, the primary slot receiver job. Maybe Isaiah McKenzie mixes in a bit more than he had been. I mean, he was really good and really integral to Buffalo's win last week. So we'll see exactly what that means. And then we have Gabriel Davis, but Emmanuel Sanders is back. And man, I mean, Buffalo should go with Davis here, especially these final 2 weeks, get him geared up to get into the playoffs. He's their best other outside wideout, opposite Stephon Diggs right now. But I don't know if they're going to go to Davis, because every game this season that Davis and Sanders have been healthy, Sanders has led the way in snaps and routes. So I don't think you can use Davis this week, and I would not want to use Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah, I agree on both of those. And, coaches tend to go with the veterans. And I don't think Emmanuel Sanders has earned his way out of the lineup to this point. And I'm not worried about McKenzie. He's been with the team for several years now. Coaches know that he can play. We saw him blow up at the end of last season when they sat a bunch of the starters at the end of the season. And Beasley was dealing with an injury at that point too. And then McKenzie just disappeared once the starters were back on the field. So I think we'll get plenty of Beasley this week. Certainly there's the risk that he doesn't get the targets because they have lots of options. But I mean, that's the risk with every wide receiver in that range.
Yeah, I mean, I think Beasley is like a fringy wide receiver 4, and just the slight chance he loses more to McKenzie, kind of has me shying away from him.
No, I think I would call him fringy wide receiver 3 with upside into the bottom of wide receiver 2 range.
Yeah, we talked about he's wide receiver 50 in PPR points on the season. He's had spike weeks, but he's had a lot of duds too. So I guess you got kind of know what you're getting with him.
Mm-hmm. Dawson Knox, predictably tough matchup last week. Just 3 targets, just 2 catches, just 11 yards. Did happen to score a touchdown on one of them. 4 touchdowns now in his past 5 games. Much better matchup this week. So I think Dawson Knox is a fairly easy start against Atlanta.
Yep, he's 8th in expected fantasy points among tight ends over the last 5 weeks, and like you said, plus matchup. So I think he's a mid-range tight end 1 play.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about some other tight ends that maybe we're comparing him with, probably actually in just a minute. Devin Singletary, suddenly a solid running back 2 to end our fantasy season. Past 3 weeks have included his 2 largest snap shares of the season and his 2 largest touch counts over the past 2 weeks. Looks like a good bet for carries and or target share here.
Yeah, 23 opportunities 2 weeks ago, 18 opportunities last week. He was actually 6th among running backs in expected fantasy points last week. He was 21st in week 15. So, I mean, there's always a chance Buffalo, changes it up at running back, but I don't really see why they would at this point. And, great matchup. I think, Singletary has as much touchdown upside as Singletary ever has. He's still probably going to lose some of that to Josh Allen and Zach Moss, but I think he's a nice RB2 play this week.
Mm-hmm. On the Atlanta side, speaking of running back 2s, I really want to like Cordero Patterson in this matchup against a run defense that's been generous. But, I mean, I think it's more of a taking a shot in a GPP than counting on him in a season-long lineup, because the past 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, a tough rushing day against the 49ers was reasonable. You could say, all right, he was facing the number 2 defense in rushing DVOA. That happens. 11 carries, 18 yards. Last week, 7 carries, 14 yards against the Lions, who are not a tough run defense at all. Cordero Patterson saw his lowest snap total in that game since week 10, and week 10 was a game he left early with an ankle sprain. Mike Davis last week matched Patterson in carries, doubled him in rushing yards. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the issue is. Maybe it's lingering effects of the ankle sprain. Maybe it's just the end of a season that has featured the most work of his career, especially as a runner. Patterson's not on the Wednesday injury report, so it's not like we can point to some specific injury. He only showed up on last week's as a Thursday rest guy. Overall, I can't believe in Patterson above like high running back 3 range this week.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think it's just, this is a career special teamer, and is he like in his 30s? He's got to be like 30, or he's got to be near there. So he's not like a young guy anymore, but it's just a career special teamer who is now up to 189 offensive touches. So he's just never handled this type of workload, since going back to his college days. I just think he's kind of running out of gas. Patterson has had his two lowest PFF offensive grades of the season over the last 2 weeks now. The volume hasn't even been great. So it's just, middling volume with poor efficiency. Bad matchup here. I mean, Buffalo can be beaten on the ground, but just in general, I don't think the Falcons offense is going to get much done here. So, he's not a must bench, but he's in RB3 territory in our rankings. So I'm sure there's a lot of teams out there right now that, have 2 or 3 better options.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some other running backs, I'm sure, that look like they make more sense over Patterson this week. It's sad, really, because if you made it to this point, he likely played a key role in doing that. But, again, you can't ignore what's happened most recently just because most of his season has gone better than that. Kyle Pitts, he's in most lineups, kind of like Mike Gesicki, because he's a tight end. But this matchup is not good, and it's not good even if you classify him as a wide receiver instead of a tight end. Now, to that end, most of Kyle Pitts' targets over the past 3 games have come against safeties in coverage. So that seems more like tight end stuff than wide receiver stuff. And the Bills, I would imagine, will try to get Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, maybe even linebacker Matt Milano on him in coverage. The Bills sit top 10 in coverage DVOA against every position except running back. So it's not a great matchup no matter where they line him up, and Atlanta doesn't have a whole lot to challenge defense with. So Kyle Pitts will probably be at the center of whatever the defensive plan is on the Buffalo side. Again, most teams probably don't have another tight end that they're strongly considering against him, but among the guys currently behind Kyle Pitts in our PPR rankings, I would start Dawson Knox, I would start Foster Moreau, and I would start Tyler Higbee over him because I think they all have more upside.
You've been trying to push Pitts down the rankings all season.
Should have worked most times.
Well, I mean, so he's finished top 13 among tight ends in 4 straight games now. Tight end 13, tight end 10, tight end 10, and tight end 4. He's 12th in expected fantasy points over the last 5 weeks. It's funny. Pitts has exactly 6 or 7 targets in 8 of his last 9 games. So you kind of know what you're getting with him volume wise. I do think, so he's played 31% of his snaps on the outside. So I do think Trey White's absence helps Pitts. I think he's capable of winning any individual matchup the Bills throw at him. Again, it's just, I don't see much ceiling here because I don't think the Falcons are going to, score much here. Pitts only has 1 touchdown on the season, but I think he's a floor low end tight end 1 this week. I think he's going to, get you 4 or 5 catches.
Yeah, and that's where I would put him. I mean, I think he's currently 8th or 9th in our rankings. So if I put 3 guys ahead of him, he's still 11th or 12th. And that's where I think he's fair. I think he's similar to Mike Gesicki in that way, in that I'm not going to reach for, Cole Kmet to play over Kyle Pitts, but I'm more concerned about him hitting his floor this week than I am about missing out on a ceiling by taking a shot on somebody else over him.
Yeah, I could see using Knox in this same game over Pitts. They're actually tied in our PPR rankings, and right behind that, it's Dalton Schultz and Mike Gesicki. I think if you really wanted to, those guys are okay. I couldn't dip into the Moreau, Higbee, Kmet kind of area over Pitts. I'd stick with Pitts.
No, that's where you gotta make the decision that counts over just sticking with the guy he drafted. But we'll talk about Dalton Schultz. He's one that I would be fine with playing Pitts over because of the respective matchups, but we'll get to that one in a little while. Russell Gage is the last Falcon really worth talking about, and I think that he's okay. as a wide receiver 3. The Falcons are likely to produce more passing volume this week than last because they're, underdogs by more than 2 touchdowns. But they've been a bad bet for passing volume ever since Calvin Ridley left. They've had one game of 40-plus pass attempts in that span, fewer than 30 pass attempts in 6 of the past 8 games, and averaging only 28.9 attempts in the 9 games since Calvin Ridley left the team, even though they're just 4-5 record-wise over that span. So, it's game script that should feature more passing volume. Even with that, they're averaging 28.9 attempts per game. Obviously, that probably doesn't hurt anybody more than a guy like Russell Gage who lives off of target volume.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The fact that they've been so low pass volume and Gage has still been doing what he's been doing kind of makes me like him a bit more in this box. I do think their pass volume is going to have to be way up. Gage has a 27% target share over the last 5 games. He has 42 targets in those 5 games. So I do think he's a guy who can get, like 10 targets in this game. It would not be fun putting, Gage in a championship fantasy lineup. But again, I do think he's a decent volume bet. Like Pitts, he's like a floor option just based on volume. I don't see a big game from Gage coming.
Yes, I agree with that. And he's absolutely could get 10 targets in this game, but he could also get, 28% target share and wind up with 6 or 7 targets in a game where the Falcons just get absolutely nothing going on offense. So right around wide receiver 30, not a guy that I'm benching for something if I don't have something more attractive. But if it's close, I'm probably going to lean toward a guy with a higher ceiling.
Yeah, wide receiver 30 in PPR and non-PPR, I would not be using Russell Gage.
I agree with that. The Bills are the worst scoring matchup for wide receivers by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Granted, some of that includes Tre'Davious White playing, but at this point, a fair amount of it also includes him not playing.
Yep.
Anything else from that game?
No.
Jacksonville at New England, Patriots by 15.5, over under 42 here. Let's start with something really exciting. No practice for James O'Shaughnessy on Wednesday with a hip injury. So we combine that with the Patriots being the toughest scoring matchup for tight ends. Total avoid on James O'Shaughnessy. So we can at least take one of those, very low end tight ends out of the mix, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, can we just say total avoid on the Jags offense? So there's not a single guy I'd want to start. I think people might be tempted by Dare Ogunbowale, but I'm not sure he's going to play that role again. Because it's one of those cases where, Jacksonville didn't go into the game knowing they weren't going to have James Robinson. They have Raquel Armstead on the roster. He was not active last week. They have this Nathan Cottrell guy I've never even heard of, but they have other bodies. And Ogunbowale has been a pass catching guy throughout his career. So I would not be surprised if like Armstead leads the Jags and carries this week, and then Dare's doing just most of the passing game stuff.
Yeah, when the buzziest guy on your offense heading into week 17 is Dare Ogunbowale, it's time to ignore the whole group. One name to maybe keep in mind for cheap DFS consideration, though, is Tavon Austin, who got 3 carries, 7 targets last week against the Jets. Obviously not a good bet for anything, but if your team is struggling and has nothing going for it, then Tavon Austin is the kind of player who suddenly looks like somebody you want to manufacture touches for. Because you can, as a coach, you can just say, how about we just give it to this fast guy and see if he can do anything in this game?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That now that you mentioned, I think that the rushing is kind of intriguing. Like, maybe he gets 6 or 7 carries in this game. To me, he'd be DFS only. I think you could do a lot better in season long. But yeah, I guess that's what we're down to in Jacksonville at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Marvin Jones might seem attractive after last week, 13 targets, 8 catches, but that followed a 4-target, 2-catch game against Houston. So, I mean, let's hope that you don't need any Jaguars this week.
Yeah, last week was Marvin Jones' first weekly finish better than wide receiver 40 since week 6. So, yeah, I would not go there.
We'll get to probably a surprising name that he's actually outscored in that span, though. Later in this show. On the Patriots side of this game, Damien Harris exploded against the Bills last week. Unfortunately for his fantasy owners at this point, Ramondre Stevenson is off the COVID list, came off at Wednesday. So we have to look all the way back to week 12 to actually find full games of both Stevenson and Harris being healthy together. And at that point, we had week 12 where Harris led in carries 11-9. The week before, it was Stevenson 12-10. Week 10, we had no Harris. Week 9, we had Harris leading 15-10. So we'll see if Stevenson's feeling any, post-COVID effects. So I think all of it makes Damien Harris the first one in. But barring that, we should expect this to be close to an even split, slightly favoring Damien Harris. And really, if Ramondre Stevenson is all the way healthy, the Patriots would be incentivized to not overwork Damien Harris, especially considering his hamstring issue this week, because they want to preserve both guys, I'm sure, for the playoffs.
Yep. Yeah. The last game or two we saw these guys together healthy, they were just rotating series. Harris might end up with more carries, but he just, kind of got lucky to get more carries on the series he was in there for. So I do think it's going to be something close to a 50-50 split. Stevenson was actually doing more in the passing game, and neither guy was doing a whole lot. It's just a good spot, though. Obviously, Jacksonville's kind of a middling run defense. They're not horrible, but you have the Patriots as big home favorites here. They're the run heaviest offense in the NFL over the past month anyway. So you could get 15 carries out of Harris and Stevenson on Sunday.
Jacksonville also opened the week with both of its starting defensive tackles on the COVID list. So we'll see. I don't know what the status of them is at this point because that was before the league changed the rule and shortened the return time. But that'll be something to look at ahead of Sunday. Both of these running backs are in play at some level. I just think make sure you don't consider Harris at the level that last week's numbers make it look like he should be.
Yes, for sure. And obviously, more attractive in non-PPR and half PPR is that, neither guy's going to do a whole lot in the passing game.
The numbers might not tell it, but I think last week actually was a positive for Hunter Henry. Only one catch in that game against the Bills, but he got 6 targets, tied for second on the team. It's a negative tight end matchup. So if anything, the Patriots would have had reason to not throw it his way, especially without Tre'Davious White on the outside. He has topped 80% playing time in 2 straight games now. I'm going to go ahead and take a shot on Hunter Henry right at the top of tight end 2 territory, maybe the fringe tight end 1, however it sorts out, but over guys like Cole Kmet and Tyler Conklin this week, who's dealing with a hamstring injury.
Yeah, I still don't think you're going to get big volume out of Henry here just because I don't think the Patriots are going to throw it more than 30 times. But Nelson Aguilar still looks like he's going to miss with his concussion, so that, helps. And the Patriots have the 3rd highest implied total. They're actually tied with Dallas for the 3rd highest implied total behind only the Bills and Patriots. So I do think Henry is a pretty strong touchdown bet for the position once you get beyond the top 3 or 4 guys.
It would be a tough decision for me if I'm staring at Hunter Henry and Kyle Pitts at tight end on my roster.
I mean, if we're talking PPR, I would definitely go Pitts. In non-PPR, it's more of a discussion because at that point you're kind of just looking for the touchdown.
Non-PPR is easily Hunter Henry for me. PPR is where I'd have a decision to make.
I mean, yards still count in non-PPR too. It's not just touchdowns.
Yeah, but a guy who's basically, a touchdown or bust versus a guy who's really bust or what's the upside? 45 yards this week?
55.
Right. Anything else in that game?
No.
Las Vegas at Indianapolis, the Colts by 6.5, even though we don't know yet who their quarterback's going to be. Over under 44.5 points. And of course, that's the biggest story for this game is Carson Wentz on the COVID list Tuesday. The NFL was immediately like, oh crap, we got to figure out how to get Carson Wentz back on the field. So let's change the rule. 5 days for him would be Sunday. So we're probably not going to know until Sunday whether Carson Wentz is going to play in this game. And even at that point, who knows what level of Carson Wentz we get for that game. I think if you're in the championship, you probably aren't looking to use Carson Wentz anyway, so it doesn't really matter for him. But it certainly could matter for like Michael Pittman.
Yeah, probably only Michael Pittman. I think it's the only guy you're really considering. You're obviously starting Jonathan Taylor regardless. The Colts O-line is getting healthier. Quentin Nelson and Mark Lewinsky, their 2 starting guards, came off the COVID list on Wednesday. Center Ryan Kelly is back after missing the past 2 games. They still have a couple of guys. Braden Smith's on the COVID list, and Eric Fisher got hurt last week. But I mean, the O-line was decimated in that game against the Cardinals. So that's good news. But again, to me, it's Jonathan Taylor, and then it's Michael Pittman as like a wide receiver 3 if the Colts get Carson Wentz back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Although tough to know whether Sam Ellinger or Alinger, I don't know, whatever his name is, tough to know whether he would be a better option than a sick Carson Wentz on Sunday. I think either way, this team's probably throwing about 14 passes in this game.
Exactly. I'm not sure the passing volume goes down much with Ellinger just because they haven't thrown much with Wentz.
Yeah. And I don't think that it's going to – I think that the Colts have a solid chance of controlling this game with Jonathan Taylor on the ground.
Yes, agreed.
So on defense, the Colts have already gotten Darius Leonard and Kari Willis back from the COVID list. They got Zach Pascal back on offense from the COVID list. We'll see about Carson Wentz. Jack Doyle looks unlikely to play at tight end. It doesn't matter unless it's a very deep league. But if you are in a very deep league or just desperate at tight end, Mo Alley-Cox – season high 90% snap share last week.
Yeah, and a good matchup here too. Vegas 22nd in adjusted points allowed to tight ends and 27th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So DFS, Mo Alley-Cox might sneak his way into one of my lineups this week.
Yeah, total touchdown or bust guy, but there is at least athleticism and size here for the targets that he does manage in this game.
Every time the ball's in that guy's hands, I'm like, what a beast. I don't understand why he doesn't get more involved.
And the Raiders are going to be, even without Jonathan Abram, who has been giving up a lot to the tight ends this year. So whoever is not good enough to unseat him is going to be in his place. So it could be an even better spot for tight ends. Keep that in mind for DFS. On the Vegas side, they'll also be without a tight end. Darren Waller, the knee might have been ready this week, but then he landed on the COVID list on Wednesday, and even the 5-day window doesn't let him get back for Sunday's game. So it looks like it should be Foster Moreau as the starter for this game.
Yeah, an awesome matchup for Moreau. The Colts tight end defense is one I've been attacking lately. They're down to 31st in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. They're 20th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings, and the Colts have allowed a tight end to score at least 11.7 PPR points in 7 of their last 8 games now. So it's just kind of been a consistent barrage of tight end points they've been giving up. So I think Moreau, is right in that, borderline tight end one mix. He's probably one of the better spot start options this week.
Yeah, I don't think he's as good a target share option as Darren Waller, but when you consider the matchup, consider that they're likely to be trailing, that they could be trailing by a fair amount in this game. I'm playing Foster Moreau, probably 3 spots higher at least than we have him in our rankings, and over Kyle Pitts for upside this week.
Well, yeah, he's tight end 11 in our rankings, so he's already in the top 12.
Mm-hmm. The other guy worth discussing on this offense is Zay Jones, and he kind of caught half of my eye early in the week when I was projecting this game. And then since then, I've realized he's been even better lately than I realized. A reliable source for receptions in recent weeks, 7+ targets, 5+ catches in 3 straight games now. And in 4 of his past 5 games so over those past 5 weeks, Zay Jones is tied for 15th among all receivers in targets. He's tied for 11th among wide receivers in targets over the past 3 weeks. Really, I don't see a whole lot of difference between Zay Jones and Russell Gage in terms of what they're presenting this week.
Guess not. I don't have any notes on Zay Jones. He didn't make my notes here. He has seen a pretty steady number of targets. He'd have to be a DFS guy only for me at this point of the season.
That's why I'm pointing out the string of reliability here. I mean, if we look back over the last 5 weeks, there are a lot of receivers that we drafted much earlier that have really done nothing. And Zay Jones has been excellent, and they've thrown the ball 38+ times in 4 of the past 5 games. So we're talking about a team that's probably going to throw it 10 more times than the Falcons here. Is probably a pretty good bet for at least 35+ pass attempts in this game. I think Zay Jones belongs in that 30 to 36 range of PPR rankings.
Yeah, I guess I don't think the Raiders are locked to throw up more than Atlanta. They've actually come down in pass rate over the last 5 weeks. They're just 14th in situation neutral pass rate, and the Colts are 27th in situation neutral pass rate again. So teams tend to run the ball against them. So I don't know. I don't think this is a high volume game on either side. I don't think it's an exciting game on either side. Not that Atlanta's exciting, but I don't know. I at this point I still feel slightly better about Gage's volume than Zay Jones. I still think Renfro, and even in this matchup, I think Foster Moreau might be ahead of Zay Jones in the target pecking order.
He should be, but there's enough there. So I'll let you, we'll finish this show, and then you can go spend a little bit more time with Zay Jones's game log, because I surprised myself with him this week. And then that's why I didn't even bother telling you before the show that I plan to try to push him up the rankings some, which it seems like you'll probably be on board with, just not to the point where I'll put him.
Yeah, I think he's a wide receiver 4 this week. That's fair.
We'll start there, and we'll see where we can get to. Anything else from this Colts-Raiders game?
No.
Tampa Bay at the Jets. The Bucs by 13, over under 45.5. Mike Evans, hamstring would still be questionable. He landed on the COVID list Monday, so there's time for him to return from that ahead of the game, but we still have to see where his hamstring's at. I guess we have to assume that Mike Evans is not going to play in this game. And without Mike Evans last week, we got 50% target share for Antonio Brown in his return from a 7-month ankle injury.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect 50% targets again this week, but I think 30 is a pretty fair projection. I don't know if you saw, but Brown has 3 reachable incentives he can still get to: catches, yards, and touchdowns. He needs 11 catches, 280 yards, and 2 touchdowns to hit his incentives. Each one's worth a third of $1 million. And not Brady seems like the type of guy who would work to get his guy there, especially in a game against the Jets where they should be able to do whatever. So Brown is a top 5 wide receiver play this week.
Especially when your boys got to get the money to pay for the fake vax cards. I mean, you got to help supply them. Exactly. Yeah, he might hit those numbers this week.
That wouldn't shock me.
I think the only change to the situation might be that Rob Gronkowski has a much better matchup this time
Yeah.
around against the Jets. So, I mean, I think Gronk gets more target share this week, but both of those guys, extremely easy plays along with Ronald Jones in this matchup.
Yeah, I would definitely go back to Gronk, and he's going to be a good DFS play too if he's going to be lower owned. The Jets are dead last in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking, so that's another guy I could see Brady wanting to get going here down the stretch. The Bucs did get Rashaad Penny off the COVID list on Monday, so I think he's going to be the other outside wide receiver. Perriman is someone maybe worth considering for DFS tournaments.
I think Rashaad Penny returning to the lineup is another mark in Antonio Brown's favor.
Yes, agreed.
Tom Brady is fine, and he absolutely could throw 4 touchdowns to just Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski in this game. But I think there's also reason to worry that his upside is limited, both by the pass catcher injuries and the way that the offense is just going to lean with all the things missing right now.
Yeah, and I mean, they did lean heavily towards the run last week based on what they had been doing. They were 46% pass in neutral situations last week. That's down from 62% over the first 15 weeks of the season, which isn't a surprise when you lose Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Leonard Fournette. That's a big part of their passing game that they lost as well. Brady earned his second best PFF grade of the season last week, so he still played really well. Just the volume was down and the weapons aren't as good. I mean, this week versus the Jets, it's not going to matter. I think he's going to be super efficient. And like you said, he could easily get 3-4 touchdowns. So, he's still in quarterback 1 range. I would not be benching Brady for any, streamers that includes Trey Lance.
Yes, I agree. I'm not looking for somebody to start over him, but if it's a close consideration between like him and Jalen Hurts, I think I'd probably go ahead and play Jalen Hurts. And I think that's probably like the realistic, consideration that you got going on here.
Yeah. Yep. I think so.
On the Jets side, Michael Carter was big last week, season high 118 yards on the ground. Congrats on getting the Jaguars last week. Before that, 9 total touches for 20 total yards against the Dolphins in the previous game. So don't overrate Michael Carter heading into this week.
Yeah, I mean, his usage was nice last week, even beyond the box score. He played a season high 74% of the snaps, 16 carries and 3 targets. It's just, this matchup is just brutal. The Bucs are missing some guys, right? Levante David and Shaq Barrett are out of this game. They're going to be missing safety Antoine Winfield, possibly. So it's not as strong a Bucs defense, but it's, I would be shocked if the Jets reach 20 points. So tough to get excited about Carter's upside.
Yes, I agree with that. Somebody who is easier to get excited about if he's back is Elijah Moore, who's expected to clear the COVID list, but we still need to watch and see what happens with his quad injury, which is what landed him on IR back in following week 13, I think.
Yeah, he's served he's been on there for 3 weeks now, so he is eligible to come off, but he was not activated. He was not designated to return on Wednesday and didn't practice Wednesday. So I'd kind of be surprised now if he's even designated to return today and then plays off of just 2 weeks of practice. So, maybe we'll see him one more time in week 18. I wouldn't plan on having him this week.
Yes, I agree. Even if he does make it back from this point, I think maybe intriguing for DFS, but I would not realistically consider him in most, redraft full season leagues. Just because of the situation that we're talking about here. Did not return to practice yet. He's been out for nearly a month. Still talking rookie with a rookie quarterback too.
Yep, agreed.
Anything else from that game?
Nope, no Braxton Berrios talk this week.
You don't think he's going to return another kickoff for a touchdown?
Yeah, I played against him in some league. It pissed me off.
I played him in one league and still lost because there's big enough rosters where one guy doing that's not going to change it. But Philadelphia at Washington, Eagles by 3.5, over under 45. And the Eagles backfield is the place to watch primarily here. Jordan Howard, no practice Wednesday, coming off the stinger that ended his week 16 prematurely. Nick Sirianni said that Howard hopes to be ready to play Sunday, so we'll have to watch his status over the next couple of days. Boston Scott, I think, is an option either way, whether Jordan Howard's in the lineup or not. But certainly if Howard's out, Boston Scott becomes a strong start this week, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. The Eagles running backs in the first meeting against Washington just a few weeks ago combined for 200 yards on 33 carries, 6.1 yards per carry. We actually have 3 games this season with Jordan Howard and Boston Scott healthy and Miles Sanders not healthy. Howard outcarried Scott 41-33 in those 3 games. Scott saw 3 targets to 0 for Jordan Howard. So I think they'd be pretty close in terms of fantasy value if we know Howard is fully healthy. And I'm not sure it's going to be the case. We'll see, like you said. I think they're both lower end RB2s if Howard plays, and if not, I think Scott is a pretty strong RB2 play. That I don't expect Kenneth Gainwell to be super involved, maybe in passing situations, but I just don't think the Eagles trust him to be a lead back or even a big part of the game plan.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't help Gainwell that he's limited with an ankle issue to begin this practice week. So yeah, I like Boston Scott and Jordan Howard. I think we're looking at something similar to Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon. Certainly not with the high end ability of Javonte Williams, but also just an offense that's going to want to lean run as much as possible here.
Yep.
Jalen Hurts crushed Washington the last time out, and that was coming off his ankle sprain. Disappointed fantasy-wise last week against the Giants, especially with just 7 rushing yards on a season-low 2 attempts. But, I mean, it was a fine game for him overall. They scored 34 points. They got 320 yards. So I'm going to look the other way on that and trust the big game that Hurts had the first time and what Hurts has been doing for most of the season to this point. No other quarterback has been as good a bet for top 12 QB, for top 12 fantasy scoring.
Right. He's had 2 bad games against the Giants. I mean, last week wasn't even horrible. He finished quarterback 13, but he's been a top 12 quarterback in 11 of his other 12 games, outside the 2 Giants games. So whatever it is about that matchup has given him trouble, but I would not be worried to go back to him this week.
Yeah, and it's not even like we need to worry about the ankle because the week before that, he ran just fine against Washington. So nothing to worry about here. Among the pass catchers, though, Devontae Smith, nice outing last week, 5 catches, 80 yards, a touchdown on 7 targets, but he's averaging just 3.9 catches per game for the year, reached that number once in the past 4 games before last week. Not a good bet for volume here, I think, in a game where, as we said, we expect the Eagles to run the ball plenty and probably control things scoring-wise. He's outside the top 40 PPR wide receivers for me. Devontae Smith's a guy that I would play Zay Jones over in PPR.
I couldn't do that. So I do think Philly might throw it a bit more than average, than they have been in neutral situations. They did that in the first meeting against Washington. They were 46% neutral pass rate, up from 38% in their previous 5 games. Washington is still tougher against the run than the pass. They're actually 4th in situation neutral pass rate against. Plus, the Eagles' backfield is banged up, so maybe that pushes them to pass a little bit more. And Washington's 30th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So the floor is still low for Smith because you could get 4 targets, but the matchup I think gets him into wide receiver 3 territory for me.
Yeah, Washington should be healthier at the outside corner spots at this point. They had Kendall Fuller on the COVID list a little while ago. William Jackson was out last week with an injury. I have to check on his injury status, but we'll see. Certainly there's upside to Devontae Smith anytime he gets on the field. And Dallas Goedert, of course, showed us his ceiling in the first meeting with Washington, season highs in targets, receptions, and yards in that game. So he's a very easy start.
Yeah, and he showed us his floor last week too, right? With the 4 targets. So he's kind of like Devonta Smith, where I do think that the floor isn't as high as you'd want it, but unlike a wide receiver, there's fewer good options to replace Goddard with a tight end. So I think he's a pretty easy starter if he's been your guy all season.
And the individual coverage matchup is better for Dallas Goedert than it is for Devontae Smith against Washington, because Washington is without Landon Collins just for the rest of the season, who had been doing a lot of that inside stuff lately. Nice. On the Washington side, impossible to actually like anything, I think. Terry McLaurin, Antonio Gibson are the decision players. So let's hit Gibson first. It's good that his toe is not on the injury report anymore, right, Jared?
Yeah, because that what had been limiting him the past few weeks. That's the injury he had late last season that lingered throughout the offseason. He's on the injury report with a hip now and was limited on Wednesday. So we'll have to see about that. But to me, his health seems to be trending up now that the toe is off the injury report.
Yeah, I mean, it's still tough to get excited. He has not run the ball great over the past few weeks anyway. Tough to know how much of that's the toe and how much of it's just a compilation of injuries at this point, because he's had multiple lower body things. Minimal rushing versus Philly last time out. 3 straight games now under 40 rushing yards, but also caught 6 balls in that game against the Eagles. So that's kind of the safety net for Antonio Gibson, assuming that he's healthy enough for his full usual workload. 3 games of 5+ catches among his past 5 games. I'd probably go ahead and start him in running back 2 range. There might be, some guys that are worth playing over him that you also have on a roster, but I'm not reaching for like AJ Dillon to play over Antonio Gibson this week.
No, he's just a volume play. I think if his health checks out, he's going to get 15+ touches in this game.
Terry McLaurin is not winning on volume, not winning on efficiency, and not winning on situation at this point. He looks to me like Devontae Smith, but with a worse quarterback and a much worse offense.
Yeah, I like Devontae Smith over McLaurin this week, and I don't know if I'd sit McLaurin for Zay Jones, but I think that's one you could honestly think about. Like you said, McLaurin has nothing working for him. He's finished outside the top 40 wide receivers in 5 straight games now. It sounds like Taylor Heineke's going to start for Washington, but Kyle Allen is going to play as well. That's what Ron Rivera said on Wednesday. So yeah, it's just not an offense. And it's a tough matchup too. The Eagles have been tough against wide receivers all season. They're second in adjusted points allowed to the position.
Did he say why he's planning to play Kyle Allen? Because I missed that one.
No, probably just evaluation season. It's like a preseason game for Washington at this point.
And they've had Kyle. I mean, Kyle Allen came with them
Yep.
from Carolina, so they know what he's got. So that seems like a knock on Taylor Heineke to me. But yeah, that's even more of a reason not to play Terry McLaurin this week. Maybe he lucks into a touchdown and you wind up regretting it. But I think that the ceiling fantasy line for Terry McLaurin this week is probably like 4 catches for 51 and a touchdown.
Well, I mean, he's still an awesome talent, which is always scary to bench. But like for whatever reason, the volume hasn't even been there. He's averaging 5 targets per game over his last 5, and he's 59th in expected fantasy points per game over that span. So it's not even like he's getting awesome usage, and it's just been inefficient. He hasn't even been getting good usage for whatever reason. I mean, he should be getting peppered with 10 plus targets every game, but it's just not happening.
Yes, he absolutely should, and he absolutely has not been. So there's just nothing to like with him right now other than, natural talent, which only gets you so far.
Yep.
New York Giants at Chicago, the Bears by 6, even though we don't know who their quarterback's going to be yet. Over under of 37.5. I will start with the Giants because it's quick. I want absolutely nothing on the Giants side at all. I'd probably even play Melvin Gordon, Cordero Patterson, Boston Scott over Saquon Barkley this week.
Yeah, I think those 3 guys are all options over Barkley. I do think he's still at least like an RB3 just based on volume. I mean, he's still been, getting 15 or so touches per game. He's at, he was, again, we've talked about this, but he was, finishing between RB20 and RB30 for the last 5 games before last week when he really dudded out. But, Chicago's been struggling against the run lately too. So I don't know, maybe Saquon's efficiency is a bit better than it has been. But I mean, I think he's an RB3.
Yeah, 34% playing time last week, his second lowest mark of the season, and trailing only the game at Dallas that he left early with the injury. Mm-hmm. I think the most interesting thing with Saquon Barkley this week is that some reporter actually asked him if he's considering spitting, peeing, or burning down the Soldier Field in Chicago.
Was that real? I thought I saw that was a hoax or something. Someone like dubbed that over. I don't know.
Maybe
it might be real. It wouldn't shock me.
I know, it was funny. It's the kind of thing that usually doesn't get asked until Super Bowl week, but whether it was fake or real, it's funny that it's out there in the world.
I know the Belichick thing was real though. Lady asked him what his New Year's resolutions are after losing to the Bills. It wouldn't shock me if the Saquon question was real.
Can you imagine going in and thinking that's what you're going to ask Bill Belichick and he's going to actually give you an answer?
I don't know how the lady even got in there, but that's another story.
On the Bears side of this one, I mentioned we don't know about the quarterback yet. Andy Dalton is off the COVID list. He's practicing, so it seems like he'll be ready if Justin Fields is not ready. Justin Fields put in a limited practice Wednesday with his ankle injury. He was also limited last Wednesday, but then did not practice Thursday or Friday and did not play in that game. So we'll see how the rest of this week goes.
Yeah, and I need to know that he is close to 100% if I'm going to use him as like a quarterback one, because you're obviously playing him for the rushing. So I don't know. I'd have to see at least one full practice from Fields to consider him an option this week.
Yeah, I think if he heads into Sunday questionable, then I would look for somebody else. I'd play Tua over him. I would play Trey Lance over him, assuming that he's a starter, and we'll get to that game in a few minutes. But yeah, it's going to be tough to trust Justin Fields at, anything far below 100%. Obviously, Andy Dalton's not in consideration for most of us, but if we get an iffy Fields health-wise versus a healthy Dalton's probably better for the pass-catching components here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Allen Robinson's back for the Bears, and he's not a fantasy option, but that has mattered. Robinson has mattered for Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet. Both guys have seen fewer targets when Robinson has played. Mooney, especially, 9.4 targets in his last 5 games without Allen Robinson, 6.6 targets in his last 5 games with Allen Robinson. So Mooney definitely takes a hit with A-Rob back.
And this could be a low volume game if the Giants continue to not put up a fight and the Bears actually build a lead here. So we'll see where that goes. Darnell Mooney has finished 5 of his past 6 games with exactly 5 receptions on varying target counts. So he's fine in wide receiver 3 range, but certainly not somebody to get excited about right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you're going to see a lot of David Montgomery in this game. He's, easily the best fantasy option in Chicago.
Definitely. You want to make a Cole Kmet sales pitch before we leave this game?
No, again, he's gone from 6.8 targets without Allen Robinson to six targets with Allen Robinson. So a slight hit there. The Giants have been a middling tight end matchup, so not an exciting guy, but Kmet has been a pretty decent catch bet for most of the season.
Yeah, you don't have to reach too far. I'll play Cole Kmet over Tyler Conklin with his iffy hamstring this week.
Me too.
Kansas City at Cincinnati, Chiefs by 5, over under 50.5. I think that's low. We'll get to that in a minute. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire almost definitely out with his shoulder injury. Darrell Williams had 5 midseason starts with CEH out, averaged 13.8 carries, 5.4 targets in those games. Only 3 total touchdowns, and the only 2 rushing scores came in the first of those 5 games. So, you can look back at that and say maybe he's not as good a bet for touchdowns as we thought, but there was definitely some bad luck involved because Williams had 15 red zone carries in that span, including 11 from inside the 10-yard line.
Yeah, Williams was 10th among running backs in expected fantasy points in those 5 games Edwards-Helaire missed, and he was 15th in actual points per game. So I think he's like a borderline RB1 this week. I would, be trying to get him in fantasy lineups. I think, Derek Gore is going to mix in for, 3 to 6 touches, but I think Williams is going to get most of the rushing work. He's going to get most of the pass catching work, and he's going to get most of the goal line work for the Chiefs.
And they're facing a Bengals team that's still banged up at linebacker. Jermaine Pratt's on the COVID list this week. Logan Wilson might return for the first time in weeks with a shoulder injury, but probably not going to be at his full strength level. So it could be an area that the Chiefs try to attack. And speaking of attack, they should have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce back to their normal levels after COVID week for both of them last week.
Yeah, Tyreek for sure. I would say, the Kelce thing it's a little scary. We've seen guys struggle coming back from COVID, and that includes Tyreek Hill, who he only played 42% of the snaps in his return last week. I think he came off the COVID list like Friday, didn't he? Kelce came off Wednesday. He came off yesterday, so he's going to get in a full week of practice. That helps. I mean, there's no way I could bench Travis Kelce in season-long leagues, but I wouldn't be shocked if he has a slow game in his first game off the COVID list.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that it's tough to gauge the impact right now because, Jalen Waddle was also coming off of the COVID list last week. Yeah. It's logical that it would matter for speed guys who could have a little bit more trouble with their breathing. It's obviously going to vary by player because some guys might have no symptoms. Other guys might be quite sick during the week. So, it's something to keep in mind, maybe not something to let totally control fantasy decisions at this point. Maybe it makes Travis Kelce a bit more of a DFS fade this week, but I agree it doesn't really affect my lineup decisions.
Yeah, and like to be clear, I haven't actually looked into that. I might do it this offseason. I'm trying to decide if I think COVID's still going to be a thing next year. If it is, then I think it's worth looking into, whether players' production has been impacted in their first game back. But like you said, there's been plenty of guys like Jalen Waddle who have come back and been just fine. So again, Kelce is a must-start fantasy option this week.
And it seems like we're going to have to assume that it'll be a thing next year still. Before we finish with the Chiefs side, Kevin Wheeler wants to know if Byron Pringle's startable this week, Jared. What are you doing?
Yeah, I actually wanted to make that note that I don't think he's startable with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce back. If you look at Pringle's last 5 games with those 2 guys healthy, he's averaged just 3.2 targets per game. He's been up to like 5, I think, is his tops. He's had a couple games with like 1 or 2 targets. So I don't think you can bank on enough volume from Pringle to use him in season-long lineups.
Yeah, he'd be a TD reliant option. We can look back even over like 5 years, and the Chiefs just don't care about getting a second wide receiver involved to any consistent degree alongside Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. So I agree with that. On the Bengals side of this one, we've talked about how well the Chiefs defense has been playing. They've also been playing a lot of home games lately, 4 of their past 5. The lone road game in that 5-game span, 34-28 overtime victory at the Chargers. Both teams in that game went over 425 total yards. I expect shootout conditions in this one as well. I think we're low on Joe Burrow in our rankings. Joe Burrow versus Tom Brady is a decision that I would have to consider. And I think I'd probably have to land on Joe Burrow this week, given who he has to throw the ball to versus who Tom Brady has. I'm playing Joe Burrow over Tom Brady and Justin Herbert if I have either of those decisions to make.
I'm not. I mean, I like where Burrow is. I might even consider Trey Lance over Joe Burrow. I mean, I know you're trying to separate Burrow from what he did last week, but again, we knew that was the perfect spot for him. The Bengals smartly went pass heavy when they should have against Baltimore. They were 65% pass in neutral situations last week. They've been 49.5% over their previous 4 games. That actually ranks 16th. So they've been middle of the pack. And I won't be surprised if they're middle of the pack. I won't be surprised if they lean even more towards the run in this matchup. And it's just a tougher matchup than it was against Baltimore. If you look back at Burrow, I mean, he's been producing as a low end quarterback 1, in his previous 4 or 5 games before last week. So I just think, that's what he is again this week. I'm trying not to overrate what he did last week.
Yeah, and I'm not overrating what they did last week. If you look back at the matchups too, though, they'll go with the pass when they need to score points.
Yep.
The passing volume comes down if it's a defense that's harder to throw against, or if they're winning the game. Maybe they get out to a lead on the Chiefs and keep it on the ground more. But to me, if the downside here is that Burrow only throws 30 passes, he's been efficient this year. I like his chances of still completing enough of them, getting to 250 yards, a couple of touchdowns. And I think the upside is that we get shootout conditions and he does throw for 320 and, 3+.
Yep. There's definitely upside. But I don't know. I guess I'm not totally with you that this game's going to shoot out. It's going to be a game I'm going to fade in DFS this week, I think, actually.
All right. I would agree that it's not a definite shootout, but I think that it's a better place for Joe Burrow this week than it is for Justin Herbert against Denver, who we'll get to in a few minutes. And my concern primarily with Tom Brady is like Joe Burrow's concern, but even to a greater degree, because he's missing his 2 primary receivers and he's facing a defense that's just going to sit there and let them do whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, I know you said you think this game's going to go over, but the Bengals have a 23-point implied total, which is middle of the pack this week. The Chargers are at 26.25. The Bucs are at 29.25. So, if you trust the Vegas lines, Herbert's team and Brady's team are going to score more than Burrow's team this week.
That's fair. I'll have to look more into the betting side of stuff before tomorrow's DFS podcast. All right. So, I mean, are there any other real decision players on the Bengals side for this one?
I guess you're probably more into Tyler Boyd and CJ Uzomah if you think Burrow's going to have a big game. If you think he's going to have a big game, I do think those guys are in play. But Boyd is 23rd in fantasy points over the past 5 weeks, but he's just 71st in expected points per game. He's just been super efficient. He's had a couple long touchdowns, which helps. He's still the 3rd option in that passing game. And then CJ Uzomah, 5.2 targets over his last 5 games, which is a decent number, but you probably still need him to score touchdowns to really help you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get super interested in them because I don't love the target upside on either one. And, Tyler Boyd could be like Michael Gallup level interesting, but he's basically Michael Gallup with short ADOT. So if I'm choosing between those 2 guys, I'll take Michael Gallup. CJ Uzomah, if you could tell me he'll get 6 targets, I'll say, yeah, I'll play him 12th among tight ends this week.
Yeah, and the Chiefs have kind of been a middling tight end matchup. They're 13th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 14th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So, I think they're a better spot start options this week than Uzomah. I think, Foster Moreau is a much better option.
Mm-hmm. Tyrann Mathieu got hurt last week and says he's going to play this week. So that'll be something to watch for that middle of the field coverage for the Chiefs side. But yeah, so not overly excited about either of those guys. They certainly are options if you're looking down in those ranges. Anything else from that Chiefs Bengals game?
Nope.
Rams at Baltimore. Rams by 3.5, over under of 46.5. And I mean, we'll start with the Rams side because I think you're just playing all of the passing pieces to the degree that you did Cincinnati's last week. I mean, if we're equating the Rams receivers to the Bengals receivers, it's not a direct correlation here because I think Cooper Kupp is Jamar Chase plus T. Higgins in terms of impact at this point. But I think Odell Beckham, Van Jefferson are still both Tyler Boyd plus ADOT.
Yeah, so over the last 5 weeks, Beckham is 30th among receivers in expected fantasy points, and Van Jefferson is 38th. So their usage hasn't been awesome, but again, it's just a great spot for the Rams. It's the spot the Bengals were in last week. We expect them to go pass heavy against this beat up Ravens secondary that lost another corner, Anthony Averett, last week. So the pass defense isn't going to be any better this week than it was last.
For sure. And Matthew Stafford's coming off a disappointing performance last week with my disappointing method of pronouncing that. I think that he's already high in our rankings this week. I think I would even push him ahead of Aaron Rodgers, given the forecast that we have for that Packers-Vikings game right now.
Oh, what are we looking at there? I haven't even looked at weather yet.
Oh, we'll get
Cold,
to that in a few minutes. 5 degrees at kickoff.
Rodgers has played in cold. I don't know. Maybe the toe will be a bigger issue in the cold. I don't. Man, I love Stafford. I don't think I could send him for Rodgers. Just how good Rodgers has been for the past like 5 weeks now. And Stafford was horrible last week. He had his lowest PFF grade of the season and the second worst on the week, ahead of only Jake Fromm. Now he had 3 solid performances in the 3 games before that, and I think he'll bounce back here. But yeah, if I were deciding Rodgers Stafford, I think I would have to go Rodgers.
Yeah, I can understand that. And we're talking about QB4 versus QB3. I don't think there are too many folks making that decision, although it's probably out there because they were both around the bottom of QB1 territory at draft time.
Yep.
And, it talked about the pass catchers here. I think even Tyler Higbee looks attractive as a fantasy option. He has seen 5+ targets in 5 straight games, 5 receptions in each of the past 2, and in 5 of his past 8. So in that fringe area where we're talking about guys like Mike Gesicki, Foster Moreau, Dawson Knox, I think Tyler Higbee is at least as good a bet for target volume and touchdown upside as any of those guys in that range.
Yeah, I prefer Moreau as a spot starter this week, but I'd use Higbee over, Cole Kmet and CJ Uzomah and all those guys.
Yes, I would take Moreau ahead of him as well for target upside, but I like Higbee over even guys like Dalton Schultz and Kyle Pitts up there.
He's a better touchdown bet than Pitts, I'll give you that.
And even outside of the passing side, Sony Michel, fairly easy start despite the matchup that favors throwing the ball. And I mean, if anything, Joe Mixon reminded us last week.
Right. And Michel he's a workhorse now. He already was, and now Darrell Henderson's out. Sounds like Cam Akers is going to be active for this game, which I cannot believe. 5 months removed from a torn Achilles, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's active and doesn't get on the field. And if he does, I'd be surprised if he gets more than 5 touches. So I mean, Michel's going to get 20+ touches in this game.
Yes, my main event lineup loves it. On the Baltimore side, Lamar Jackson's out there practicing and limping around the practice field. We got Tyler Huntley activated off the COVID list today, Thursday. So to me, the offense is probably better if we get healthy Huntley over limping Lamar, but we'll see where the rest of this week takes it.
Yeah, I guess at this point, I'm expecting it to be Huntley, considering how bad Jackson looked on the practice field just a few days before this game. And yeah, I mean, if it's Huntley, it's not a great matchup, but the rushing I think would put him in play. Like I'm looking at the rankings, I think right around Trey Lance and Taysom Hill is where he belongs because he's very similar. I mean, the passing projection is kind of shaky, but the rushing projection is big.
Yeah, and I think that if you're looking in that range, and I agree that that's the range he belongs in, it's tough for me to not like Huntley over both Taysom Hill and Trey Lance because the advantage for Huntley over Lance is clearly that we've seen him play for a couple of weeks now as the starter, and the advantage over Taysom Hill is much better surrounding talent. I mean, the surrounding talent is even at least comparable to what Trey Lance will have for the 49ers. So I would feel best about Tyler Huntley among those 3 quarterbacks.
I think I'd rank them Lance, Huntley, Taysom, and just the combination of Lance's rushing upside, the weapons, and he gets the Texans, where Huntley's going against the Rams and Taysom's going against Carolina. It's still a pretty good defense there.
Back to the Ravens backfield, Devontae Freeman a couple weeks ago looked like somebody we could feel good about using, and then his use completely fell off of the past 2 games. 6 carries in each of those contests, 3 combined targets over that span. Latavius Murray, meanwhile, has been right there even with him in both categories, so they're both basically unusable.
Yep, agreed. Freeman down to 56% of the snaps over the past 2 games, 56% in both of them. So it's turned into something close to a 50-50 committee. So yeah, try to avoid Freeman if you can.
Anything else worth discussing on the Baltimore side?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Hollywood Brown has basically turned into Cole Beasley. If you look at his numbers, targets have been massive, but the ADOT is way down. The yards per catch is way down. But again, he's still getting 10 targets per game. So I still think he's a good fantasy starter. Just there hasn't been the downfield shots that we were kind of expecting from him.
He's a Jaguar that you just drive around the neighborhood. So it still looks nice, still fun to have.
Yep.
Houston at San Francisco, 49ers by 12.5, over under 44. And of course, the big story here is Jimmy Garoppolo's right thumb, not yet ruled out for the game. It certainly seems like things are heading in that direction. Just given the description of the injury, it's tough to imagine him playing through it, even though he apparently played through it for at least half of Thursday night's game.
Not very well. He wasn't good in the second half of that game. Yeah, torn UCL and a fracture in his throwing thumb. So I'd be surprised if he played. So we're going to get Trey Lance. His second start. His first start came in week 5 against Arizona, which, tougher defense than he's going to get here. He had no George Kittle in that game. Brandon Ayuk was not Brandon Ayuk yet. That was still when Ayuk was in the doghouse. So it's a much better spot here for Trey Lance. And even in that first game, he finished quarterback 20, but that was without a touchdown, and again, without those weapons. So I feel pretty good about him. Even I don't feel good about the passing. Like, he could disappoint as a passer again, but just the rushing projection alone, Lance ran, 16 times for 89 yards in that game. So, there's no quarterback, I think, with a better rushing projection than Lance this week.
I cannot say that I would feel good, but I mean, I can't say that I would feel bad either if we're playing a running back at quarterback this week, which is basically what we're doing. And in, one of the best matchups to do it against Houston. Not only is Houston not good, but I mean, at this point in the year, there have got to be plenty of Texans that are like, is the season still going? Can we please just can we do something else on Sunday?
I think Houston and Detroit are the two teams to me that suck and are out of it, but seem like they're still kind of trying. That's true. Versus like the Jets and some other teams.
Yeah, I mean, they did just beat the Chargers, so I'm not being fair to them, but it's a good spot for Trey Lance to be in. He's 12th in our Week 17 rankings right now. He's right with Taysom Hill. To me, Trey Lance versus Taysom Hill is a coin flip, and it's not because I think Taysom Hill is any better than Trey Lance. It's just what I have seen so far, and it would be a lot easier for me if it were Week 12 to say, yeah, let's take a shot on Trey Lance and see what happens in this game.
Yeah,
but Taysom Hill, by the same token, he's not like this proven commodity. I know that we have some games worth of Taysom Hill giving us good fantasy numbers, but we're also talking about a less than a half a season sample on him. So he could have a total dud and it wouldn't be like, well, history told us. I wouldn't reach beyond that though. For somebody, I wouldn't play Trey Lance over Joe Burrow or Tom Brady or anybody like that, because those are the guys that if I lose because I played Trey Lance instead of them, I'm like, what the hell was I doing? He had started one game. I need to not just chase the pretty thing and play the quarterback that helped me get into championship week.
Yeah, again, if I had Trey Lance and Joe Burrow, that'd be a decision I was, mauling until Sunday morning. But yeah, like Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, I'm not sitting those types for Trey Lance. It is interesting too. The Niners have a 28.25 point implied total. It's 5th highest on the week. I don't know if Vegas is still expecting Jimmy G to start, because it really hasn't moved a lot since the open. But if that's their implied total with Lance under center, I think that's super exciting for Trey Lance.
I'm surprised, and I wonder how much of that is what is expected or what they expect bettors to do with it.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know enough about the process to know how much of either of those things factor in. I think that we would probably get a lot of action if they had, the Niners at like 24.5 points or something like that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the takeaway though is that, Vegas expects the Niners offense to do pretty well, even if it's Trey Lance, and I'm with that.
I'm very interested to see what a Trey Lance game looks like. I'm glad that I'm not going to be finding out with any of my championship week lineups. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about him tomorrow on the DFS show too, of course. I mean, I think he's going to be a pretty easy cash play, and then you got to decide what you want to do with him in tournaments, because I do think he's going to be pretty popular.
Yeah, that'd be a no for me in GPP lineups, but yeah, we'll talk about that more on Friday. Elijah Mitchell, back to this backfield, returned to limited practice Wednesday. It's a strong spot if he's good to go. That said, it's a knee issue here, so it makes it a riskier spot, both to trust Elijah Mitchell in playing and because, there's reason for the Niners to limit his exposure, even if he is back in the game more than they normally do, because especially if they do get out to this kind of lead that they're expected to, I mean, why not save Elijah Mitchell for potential postseason games?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. We'll see what he does in practice the rest of the week. If he's limited limited questionable, he'll be a shakier start. If he's like not on the final injury report, I'll feel better about using him, because everything we've seen so far this season, when Mitchell's healthy, he's been their guy. And we've even seen that when Mitchell's not healthy, it's been like all Jeff Wilson. So, Kyle Shanahan clearly wants to kind of ride one guy this season. So again, we'll have to see what Mitchell does the rest of the week. That'll kind of determine how safe of a play. But I do think he is the fantasy play over Jeff Wilson if Mitchell's active on Sunday.
I agree, assuming that we get to the weekend with things looking good for Elijah Mitchell. And it's a good enough matchup where even if he's in the game for 12 carries, he could get 56 yards and a touchdown and then sit down, and we're okay with that kind of production. If we do get Trey Lance here, I'm certainly downgrading Debo, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk versus where they would be normally.
Yeah.
I think Ayuk is the only one of the three that really gets a significant knock, though, and is a guy that I would bench where I might otherwise play him.
Yes, Ayuk I would try to bench if Lance is under center. Debo I couldn't. I mean, I think you have to expect the efficiency to come down quite a bit. The volume probably comes down a little, although, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo had only averaged 31 passes over his last 5 games. We have Trey Lance right now projected for 26 passes this week. So we have the passing volume coming down a bit, but it's not like it was a high passing volume offense to begin with. Then, with Debo, you have to hope he continues to get some of the rushing work. He has 6.5 carries per game over his last 5. And I mean, for how good he's been on the ground, I don't think the Niners are going to go away from that too much.
Yeah. On the Houston side, Brandon Cooks is back from the COVID list, came off at Wednesday. So I think we have to be wary of the post-COVID effect with him. It would be nice if we get some kind of reports on, how he did with it. It would be nice to know if a player was particularly sick, when symptoms stopped. I know that maybe there's some privacy issues, but anybody who's willing to talk about it would be nice to hear that. He does at least get the full week of practice. So, we'll watch for any hints on that heading into the weekend. Otherwise, Brandon Cooks is just going to be, I don't know, an uncomfortable, like high wide receiver 3 play, I think.
Yeah, he does feel that way. I mean, we probably should like him more than that. I mean, he's been really good with Davis Mills. I mean, he had the 2 big games prior to missing last week. He went over 100 yards in both of his previous 2 games. If you just look at his last 5 games with Davis Mills, 9.4 targets, 7 catches, 79 yards in those 5 games, 16th in expected fantasy points per game over those. So, to me, the biggest issue is the COVID thing. Some of these guys have been on the injury report too, like with illness still and limited in practice. I think Dalvin Cook was listed as limited in Wednesday's practice. That could be a hint. I don't think Cooks was on the injury report. So I don't know if, I guess that means he was able to put in a full practice on Wednesday at least. Yeah.
If we had, fully healthy Cooks with no concern on that front, I'd be like, why is he not inside our top 20 this week? But as it is, it's like, I hope he's good. Yeah. Any close decisions, I'm probably going to have to lean toward the other guy.
Well, it is still the Texans, and it's Davis Mills, and they have a 15.75 point implied total. So there's definitely still a downside, but Cooks is good, and he's been dominating targets when he's been healthy.
Previously, that was the only guy we had to talk about on the Houston side, but Rex Burkhead changed that last week with a big game, and David Johnson certainly doesn't look like a great bet to play. He went on the COVID list Monday. Even if he makes it back, he still has the quad injury that cost him last week's game. So we should at least get Rex Burkhead as the lead running back again this week. Jared, are you playing him?
I mean, I'd prefer not to, but I mean, he has been getting enough volume where he's in play. Burkhead has averaged 14.5 carries and 2.3 targets over his last 6 games. That's kind of when he took over as the lead back. He's 24th among running backs in expected fantasy points over that stretch. He had the awesome matchup last week against the Chargers. It's much tougher against San Francisco. The Niners second in Football Outsiders run defense, DVOA, 13th in adjusted points allowed to running back. So I think, go back to expecting the efficiency we were getting from Burkhead, previous 5 games, not what we got from him efficiency wise last week.
Yes. Last week, the Chargers 32nd in run defense DVOA. This week, San Francisco is number 2. So 22 carries for 42 yards incoming for Rex Burkhead. That might put him in contention for plenty of teams, not somebody to go chasing after. Basically Michael Carter level play this week, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And nothing else on the Houston side, right?
No.
Denver at the Chargers. Chargers by 6.5, over under 46. We got Tim Patrick on the COVID list Wednesday. I'm not sure anything matters in the Denver pass offense because we're probably going to get Drew Lock starting again this week, and that's not good for anybody.
Do you know Drew Lock got the second best PFF grade among quarterbacks last week? I watched the game. He wasn't a disaster. I didn't think he was great. The problem for Denver's offense last week, if you started any Bronco, you were disappointed. Even the running backs. They ran only 40 offensive plays last week. They didn't have the ball. But I don't know, I guess Locke played decent for the guys who grade that stuff. I still wouldn't want to start any of these Broncos pass catchers. That includes Noah Fant.
Yeah, I think Drew Lock is interesting for like a GPP format, especially because you look at the Chargers defense right now, and Derwin James is still a question with his hamstring, but COVID has claimed Chris Harris, Nasir Adderley, Michael Davis, Alohi Gilman, who was the fill-in for Derwin James last week. Joey Bosa is just coming off the COVID list yesterday, Wednesday, so chance for him to see some effects. So I mean, it could be an upside spot for Drew Lock. I don't think it matters for season long. I'm not playing him. I'm not excited about any Broncos wide receivers, but don't be surprised if we get something from the Broncos pass offense this week.
I mean, again, I think it's going to be better than it was last week, just for play volume alone, if nothing else. I'd go back to both these running backs. We just talked about the Chargers matchup that Rex Burkhead just went off in last week. Chargers dead last in run defense DVOA, and they're 27th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. In the first meeting between these two teams, Melvin Gordon, 17 carries for 83 yards. Javonte Williams, 14 carries for 54 yards and a score. Denver had positive game script in that game. They actually won it, so that helped. But I don't know. I think they should be able to keep this one close enough, and I think they are going to lean super run heavy when the game is close. So I think there'll be enough for Williams and Gordon to both have pretty solid fantasy days.
I agree. And we just mentioned how the Chargers defense helped Rex Burkhead become a thing again last week, 32nd in run defense DVOA. You mentioned 19 and 18 total opportunities for Gordon and Javonte Williams in the first meeting. I don't think the Chargers are playing like a team that wants to take a big lead on Denver and put the Broncos out of running the ball in this game. So I agree, going back to both Broncos running backs this week. I think they're both fairly attractive at, appropriate levels of consideration.
Yep, and you still prefer Javonte. Gordon's maybe a slightly better carry bet, but Javonte's been doing almost all the pass catching work now.
And we mentioned on last week's preview show, but the Broncos defense has been really tough lately, limiting opponent scoring. Even in losing last week, they didn't let the Raiders do a whole lot offensively. Justin Herbert, in that first game that they did lose, where they only scored 13 points, still wound up with 303 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. So not overly worried about Justin Herbert for this one, especially back home. 2+ touchdowns in 5 of his past 6 games. And last week is the one game in that span where he didn't get at least 2 touchdown passes. Threw for 336, completed 77% of his throws against Houston. It was his 4th 300-yard game among the past 6. So, when I talk about playing somebody over Herbert, it's because I love the upside on the one guy, not because I'm worried about Justin Herbert this week.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not an ideal matchup for Herbert, but he's just been too good in real life for the most part. I mean, last week was disappointing, but especially in fantasy. Top 12 quarterback in 6 straight games now. Top 6 quarterback in 5 of those 6 games, including that first Denver game, as you mentioned. It's the reason Denver hasn't been giving up a ton of fantasy points really to any position is they're first in plays against. They're just not giving up a lot of plays. The Chargers did run 71 plays against them in that first meeting. So if they can get it, even up into the upper 60s, I think Herbert and all these guys will be fine.
I think Mike Williams could be a candidate for COVID hangover this week. He's not yet off the COVID list as we speak, unless he has come off at some point today on Thursday. Did not before the show started, at least. And today marks 5 days since he landed on the COVID list. So this would be the absolute beginning of when he could. And he is unvaccinated. Whatever you believe on that front, scientifically, it says that he's more likely to have symptoms that are affecting him. So I would be a little bit wary of Mike Williams this week if he is back for this game. He's probably not inside my top 30 PPR receivers.
I mean, he's been more disappointing than not anyways, even before COVID. That includes the first game against Denver. He finished wide receiver 50 that week. And he's wide receiver 40 in expected fantasy points over the last 5 weeks now. So, we've talked about it, but the usage has been nowhere near what it was in the beginning of the season.
Jared Cook also failed to capitalize last week with the matchup and with Mike Williams missing. So I'm not particularly interested in him this week.
Yeah. He scored in the first meeting against Denver, but he just caught only 2 passes in that game. And Denver has been the second toughest fantasy matchup for tight ends this season.
Anything else from this game?
Austin Eckler's back, and he's not on the injury report with the ankle, which is something I was watching because, the last time we saw him, he was limited by the ankle, but it looks like that's behind him now, so he should be back into his usual role.
Nice. And that means no Justin Jackson unless you're really reaching for a running back, right?
Correct.
Detroit at Seattle, Seahawks by 6.5, over under 42.5. I said last week that it seemed like the line favoring Seattle by 6 against Chicago, I think it was 6 points, seemed like too many points to give the Seahawks, and then they lost that game. Now, I wouldn't go out and lay money down on Detroit, but choosing Seattle to beat anybody by 7 points at this stage does not seem like a good bet to me. I don't know how much that matters for fantasy, other than that this game is not a great spot to go looking for big fantasy upside. Other than Rashaad Penny, I guess.
How about Amon-Ra St. Brown?
I realized that as I was saying it, that's the other one. So let's go back to going through the players. And DeAndre Swift, I think, is the first name worth addressing because he hasn't played since Thanksgiving because of a shoulder injury. Full practice on Wednesday. So, Jared, assuming we get a couple more full practice days from Swift, are you tossing him back into lineups for Week 17?
Probably. I mean, I'd have to be stacked, I think. If we're talking full PPR, he's 13th in our full PPR running back rankings. I mean, that's lower than I'd rank him if he wasn't coming off the shoulder. Like, I do think there's probably some risk of re-injury, although, it has been 5 weeks now. And like you said, full practice on Wednesday. But I think there's also a chance Detroit eases them back in, obviously, with their season going nowhere. But Seattle's 31st in adjusted points allowed to running back. So the matchup is awesome too. And Swift was producing as a top 10 back before going down. So again, downgrading him a bit because of the shoulder. But I think in a lot of cases, he makes sense to get back in fantasy lineups.
Yeah, I mean, if he were at full health, I think he'd be second or third in our rankings this week for this matchup. So I think anywhere really around 15 or so is fair to consider him this week. We'll see how the next 2 days go because, sometimes guys have that day and they're like, oh, I'm not as ready as I thought I was. And then it's limited thereafter. So we'll watch him. Josh Reynolds is limited. He's on the COVID list as of Monday. Jared Goff is back off the COVID list, but he's dealing with a knee issue. So we don't know if he's going to play. Not having Reynolds can obviously only help Amon-Ra St. Brown's target situation. And apparently it doesn't matter whether Jared Goff is playing because Amon-Ra St. Brown is recession proof.
He has been. Now, I'm really curious to see what happens to his role and his usage with Switchback. Like they've been using St. Brown in the backfield on something. They've been swinging him out of the backfield to get him the ball. I got to think Swift's return cuts into St. Brown's volume a little bit, but I mean, he can lose 3 targets and still be getting, 7 or 8 targets. Seattle somehow has been pretty tough against wide receivers this season, but there's no individual matchup I'm worried about. So I still think St. Brown's a pretty nice PPR play this week, even though I do think his volume is going to come down a little bit with Swift back.
Yeah, I mean, it's bound to, but I also, if I'm playing right now with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm playing him this week, unless we have like a stacked kind of situation like I talked about earlier with the much bigger names. 4 straight games of 11 plus targets, 4 straight games of 8 plus catches. So, maybe he comes back to earth this week and lets you down, but that's the kind of letdown that I'm okay with because it's like, I was just trusting the guy who had been crushing it for a month in PPR. If it doesn't work, that's football.
Yes, I agree.
On the Seahawks side, another great spot for Rashaad Penny. One more carry last week for him than Russell Wilson had completions in a game that they lost, albeit late, but it's a spot where it's going to be tough to not use Rashaad Penny, right?
Yeah, definitely. He finished as a top 10 running back in 2 of his last 3 games against Houston and Chicago. So it's been, positive matchups, but he gets another positive matchup here against Detroit. Penny has handled 33 of the Seahawks 46 running back carries in his 2 healthy games. That's a 72% carry share, which is, a nice number again when you're facing the Lions. And he's looked awesome too. Like he's looked like, the first round pick that he was back in, whatever year that was.
Yeah. He's the Rex Burkhead, Michael Carter, Damien Harris from last week that you can feel good about using this week.
Yes. Yep.
DK Metcalf, on the other hand, I would not feel good about. He's in wide receiver 3 territory in our rankings, and there might even be guys right behind him there that I would play over him this week. Last week, we had Tyler Lockett come back from the COVID list. Metcalf still fell 1 target short of Lockett in that game, 6-5. Did have the 41-yard touchdown. That was one of 2 receptions against a bad Bears defense. Since Russell Wilson returned in week 10, DK Metcalf ranks 13th among wideouts in targets, 49th in PPR points. The guys ahead of him include Jakeem Grant, Jamison Crowder, Marvin Jones, and Laviska Shenault.
Yeah, see, that's like you say, he's 13th in targets, and I want to be like, the production's going to start coming when he's getting that type of. He's still on the injury report with that foot. I think he didn't even practice on Wednesday. I got to think that's an issue. But even in this matchup, the Lions secondary is just horrible. Metcalf really should have his way with it. But Detroit's also 7th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. That's largely because they just haven't faced a lot of targets because teams just run on them. That's probably what Seattle is going to be able to do here. So I'd be scared to sit DK Metcalf, but there are plenty of teams still alive that, I'm sure have 3 better options.
I would comfortably play Amon-Ra St. Brown over DK Metcalf. And that is something that if somebody played that recording for me in September, even, I'd be like, well, what happened to me in December? But it wouldn't even be a second thought for me right now. It's not close between them.
Yeah, I would. It wouldn't be comfortable for me though.
No, I'd feel just fine about it too. And also give me Tyler Lockett if you happen to have both Seahawks wide receivers. Oh, yeah. Even though it was Metcalf outscoring him last week, it was Tyler Lockett easily ahead of him, for weeks before that. Gerald Everett caught 4 balls last week for the 2nd straight game, 4th time in 5 games, and 5th time in 7 games. So he's a solid bet right in that, upper region of tight end 2 territory.
Yep, good matchup for Everett. The Lions 24th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Will Disley is back off the COVID list, and he was, taking some snaps and routes from Everett before landing on the COVID list. But Everett's still the lead guy here. I do still think you're going to get 4 to 6 targets out of him.
Yeah, I think I would play Everett over Conklin, who's got that hamstring issue. Everett versus Cole Kmet is pretty much the same guy, I think.
Yeah, Conklin will just have to see about, but if there's any question with him in the Sunday night game, I think you got to go Everett. I'd probably go Kmet over Everett. I just think he's a slightly better target bet.
Kevin Wheeler wants to know between Russell Wilson and Taysom Hill, Jared, who you got at quarterback this week?
Taysom for me, pretty easily.
Yes, I agree. That's where I talked about not taking Trey Lance over somebody who's gotten me there. Russell Wilson has been mostly letting us down, so I'm going to go ahead and chase the rushing with Taysom Hill pretty easily over Russell Wilson this week, assuming that both are ready to go. Carolina at New Orleans, speaking of that, Saints by 7 points, over under 38.5. And on Carolina's side, Sam Darnold is ready to go. He's going to get the start this week, and that's about all I have to say about that. DJ Moore is the only Panther that's really in consideration. He's a volume winner, 4 straight games of 10-plus targets. If he keeps going, he might someday be Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, and Moore's hamstring is off the injury report now too. He was questionable heading into the last 2 games. I do think Sam Darnold is better news for DJ Moore. It's not good news, but I think it's better than Cam Newton. You're probably just going to get more passing volume, maybe slightly more efficient passing from Darnold. But yeah, it's just it's volume and talent with DJ Moore. I think he's a pretty decent play this week.
I'm just looking forward to seeing how many quarterbacks play in this game for the Panthers. On the defensive side, the Panthers currently have Hassan Reddick on the COVID list, and I believe he just went on yesterday, so I don't think he will have time to be back to play. Brian Burns is on the COVID list. Shaq Thompson's on the COVID list. Those 2 guys might have time to come back, but obviously have a chance to be limited. And Stephon Gilmore is probably out with a groin injury. So we already kind of like Taysom Hill here. The matchup's only going to be better because of all those situations. Yeah. I think there's nice upside to Taysom Hill.
Yeah, Carolina's been tough against the pass this season. They are 9th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, but they're 20th in run defense DVOA, which, is almost more important for Taysom Hill. The concern for the Saints, they've been missing their 2 tackles for like the better part of the last, month plus now. And I'm not sure those guys are going to be back this week. So that's worth monitoring. But like you said, those injuries on the Panthers defense will definitely help Hill.
What's the injury for Ryan Ramczyk?
Well, he's on the COVID list, I think, and then Armstead is still hurt with whatever. But Ramczyk was hurt before he went on the COVID list. So.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about, because Ramczyk, I believe, came off the COVID list today or yesterday. So I think on that front he should be good. And then we'll watch the injury report. It doesn't look like Ramczyk's on that right now, so that would certainly help. Of course, Taysom Hill is also coming off the COVID list, which caused him to miss Monday night game and introduced all of us to Ian Book. So we'll hope that he's good health wise. Obviously, they can't limit his snap count unless he's seriously in bad shape. So should be all right on that front. I'm going to go ahead and bet that he delivers for us rushing wise, and that he just gives us, enough numbers overall to prop up like a top 12, I guess, QB 12 starting point for the projection.
Yeah, like, again, not starting him over the Bradys, the Burrows, the Herberts. Again, I would even use Trey Lance over Hill this week, but I would use Hill over like Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins and those types.
I agree with that. And it would be a coin flip for me between Taysom Hill and Trey Lance. Basically the same guy at this point, just one I've seen and one I have not, pretty much.
Yep.
Anything else worth discussing on that side?
Nope.
Arizona at Dallas, the Cowboys by 5.5, over under a 51.5, which I believe is the highest of the week. Rondale Moore for the Cardinals remained out of practice Wednesday. It doesn't matter a whole lot other than leaving targets available for the other guys that we're actually considering. Zach Ertz limited Wednesday with his hamstring issue. So the fact that he's practicing at all, I think is good for that because he played through it last week. Chase Edmonds limited with a back issue. Again, the fact that he's practicing at all is good for Chase Edmonds, especially because no James Conner at practice Wednesday. So it would be a great situation for Edmonds if Conner is out once again.
Yeah, the Arizona beat writer said Conner was back on the practice field Thursday. I never, put all the stock into those. They sometimes end up being wrong or whatever. So we'll see how he's listed on the report. It does sound like he has a chance to play. I mean, he was kind of close to playing last Saturday. So we'll see. Edmonds was fourth in expected fantasy points last week without James Conner. So he's an RB1 if Conner is out. Even if Conner is back, I think in this matchup, I prefer Chase Edmonds with the Cardinals underdogs. They're probably going to be playing from behind. That's, Edmonds more in the passing game, I think. But yeah, we'll have to see about Conner.
Yeah, and especially with the way Arizona's played the past 2 weeks since getting Kyler Murray back, I expect them to fall behind in this game. And if they do that, we saw last week even when they were trailing by a couple of scores, they were still throwing short in that game where I was waiting for Kyler Murray to go under his yardage total, and he barely got over it in that late drive. But I think that they will fall behind. I think they'll do plenty of passing. I like Chase Edmonds. And in close decisions, I like Christian Kirk and AJ Green, not as much as Christian Kirk, but okay to some degree. I guess the fact that I almost called him AJ Brown shows how, I don't know, unexcited I guess I am about AJ Green, relatively speaking.
Yeah, he's not AJ Brown, that's for sure. Green kind of looks like a, what is he, 33-year-old wide receiver in week 17. He kind of looks like he's running out of gas. He has 5 catches on 11 targets over the last 2 games without DeAndre Hopkins. The passing game is running through Christian Kirk and Zach Ertz. Kirk has 21 targets over the last 2 games. Zach Ertz has 24 targets over the last 2 games. Some of that has been matchup based. They played the Colts last week, which is a good tight end matchup. But I do think those are going to be the 2 best bets for targets going forward. So I think Kirk is a nice play, just based on volume. And I think Zach Ertz is, one of the 4 or 5 best target bets at tight end at this point.
And especially playing this Dallas defense, using quick developing routes and attacking the middle of the field is going to be probably their best bet for gaining yardage on this group.
Yep.
On the Dallas side, it's really tough to sit anything after how last Sunday night went with everybody scoring at will. Dalton Schultz, I think, is the strongest sit candidate among guys that are, within consideration. Arizona, the 4th worst scoring matchup for tight ends by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. George Kittle is the only tight end all year to reach 8 PPR points against the Cardinals. Only he and Tyler Higbee have topped 3 receptions against Arizona this year. And it's the strongest spot by Football Outsiders coverage DVOA in their ratings is tight end for the Cardinals defense. Beyond that, you might say for a player like George Kittle, we could have said all that matchup stuff, but obviously he is a focal point for San Francisco. In Dallas's case, they don't need Dalton Schultz to be heavily involved in the passing game. They have plenty of talent at the other spots. So I think when you consider all that, Dalton Schultz, I want to like him more this week because I say this as somebody who benefited quite a bit from Dalton Schultz's points over the past 2 weeks. I don't think he's a great option this week.
Yeah, he's shaky for sure. I mean, I think if you start him, you're hoping the Cowboys offense, their success on offense, and I do think they'll have plenty of success here, just kind of carries him and maybe gets him into the end zone. The Cowboys wide receivers, all 3 of them have been healthy the last 3 weeks now. And Schultz has 8 and 9 targets over the last 2 weeks, but he also had 3 targets in that first game. And it could kind of be back to one of those games, like you said, with I think the wide receivers having the better matchup this week than Schultz does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like we said on the kind of the opposite of what we said on the Dallas side, attacking Arizona makes more sense on the outside rather than right in the middle with the linebackers they have and the safeties they have. So, probably I might end up having Dalton Schultz on the bench in my main event lineup, which is a tight end premium format, that's going to be one where I don't feel comfortable doing it, especially with Dak Prescott in the lineup at quarterback. But I think that Tyler Higbee and Foster Moreau are probably both ahead of Dalton Schultz for me in terms of week 17 upside.
I could see Moreau over Schultz. I mean, but I've been burned by Higbee too much this season. I can't really give you a straight answer there.
That's right. Anything else worth discussing on the Dallas side?
Nope. Zeke's looking better to me in the PFF grades. Agree, it was his best PFF grade since week 9. So I think he's kind of rounding into form. It's still like a 60-40 split between him and Pollard. So Zeke doesn't have like the ultimate upside, but I think he's a strong play this week.
Yeah, he's healthier, and it makes it a lot easier that the whole offense bounced back in such a big way last week. You don't even need a good Zeke Elliott game for him to be a good fantasy bet.
Yep.
On Sunday night, we got Minnesota at Green Bay. Packers by 6.5, over under 47.5. The forecast here calls for 5 degrees, according to NFLweather.com at kickoff. So I'm not going to say that it being that cold keeps you from throwing the ball, but it certainly doesn't help the passing game with a grip for the quarterback or guys who have to have a football hit their hands all night.
And people have looked into this, and high winds and then also extreme colds does lower scoring and passing production. I would guess 5 degrees qualifies as extreme cold. I might have to go look back at those studies to see what they found. But it especially makes me worry about the Viking side here in their passing game. I think guys like Tyler Conklin and KJ Osborne, who are fringy starters this week, I might shy away from them with that weather forecast.
Yes, that is the reaction for me too, is to like KJ Osborne and the Packers receivers less than I would have otherwise. Certainly not downgrading Devontae Adams or Justin Jefferson. Paul Charchin, who has been, a fantasy guy forever and a Minnesota radio guy, had a tweet earlier. I'm trying to look up, not sure I'm going to be able to get to it quickly enough, but had the average passing numbers for games where it's in single-digit degrees at kickoff. And, it's ugly stuff. Now, it's tough to know from that average exactly what quarterbacks we're looking at, right. But the message is it's not going to be a great passing situation. So if anything, you downgrade everybody heading in. And obviously that affects the fringe guys more than, say, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. So, I guess like Tyler Conklin, between this weather and his hamstring, I would not use him this week. KJ Osborne, if you look, so Adam Thielen missed 2 full games, and he basically missed the 2-game sandwiching those. He left early. Osborne has 7+ targets in 3 of those 4 games, and he's finished wide receiver 21 or better in 3 of those last 4 games. So, he's been good when Thielen's been out. But the weather is a concern. But I guess I would still consider Osborne as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 play this week.
Yeah, I think he's fine in that mix. He would be somebody that I was probably looking at a little bit more if it was a nicer game. And then on the Green Bay side, if it's a bad game for passing, it can only help the backfield, right? Especially when we've got 2 guys in Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon that Green Bay is certainly fine with either handing the ball to or throwing it to.
Yep. Yeah. Jones has kind of pulled back away from Dillon over the last 2 weeks. 25 carries and 8 targets for Aaron Jones, 16 carries and 4 targets for A.J. Dillon. Dillon's just 42nd in expected fantasy points over the last 2. So, he's a tougher guy to count on this week, unless you're sort of expecting the Packers to just pound the ball on the ground a whole bunch in this weather, which is definitely possible. But, Jones, definitely the better fantasy play, and Jones is someone I'd feel good about using as a, higher end RB2 this week, I think.
Yes, I agree with that. And it's certainly possible that they're like, let's throw A.J. Dillon at these guys a bunch because it's going to get hurt. It's going to hurt to have this big guy running into you all night. So, if you're looking down in that range and we're talking like fringe of RB2 territory, there's kind of the story that you can write that makes A.J. Dillon an upside play in that territory. I wouldn't go reaching over Antonio Gibson, who I mentioned earlier, to play A.J. Dillon in hopes that thing goes in that exact way.
Definitely.
And I just did find the numbers from Charch's tweet. So apparently the average NFL passing game over the last 8 years in single-digit weather or colder is 16 completions, 160 yards, 0.3 of a touchdown. So I'm not sure exactly how many games that is. Right. I'm not sure who the quarterbacks were that participated in that, but obviously those are bad numbers no matter who is playing quarterback. So, don't go crazy replacing everybody, but probably not a game to look for fringe passing upside.
Agreed. I still kind of like MVS though, but I always like MVS.
This is the kind of night that I'm not going to like MVS, but it depends on who you're comparing him to. And I mean, ultimately, based on who you're probably realistically comparing him to, you take a shot that Aaron Rodgers finds him from 60 yards out in any given game.
Well, I mean, 31 targets over his last 4 games for MVS, and the Vikings are dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So it's a good matchup. Everything besides the weather.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if the forecast gets better as we get closer to the game too. So that'd be nice. The final game of the weekend, Cleveland at Pittsburgh on Monday night. The Browns by 3 in this one on the road, over under 41. On the Browns side, we're going to have to wait and see a bit on Kareem Hunt. He is off the COVID list, but he still has a question with the ankle. First practice report for this one is coming today, Thursday. So, we'll just have to see his health level, unless you've heard anything already.
He was not out there for practice today, and he had a high ankle sprain. That was in week 14, so he's only 3 weeks removed. That's usually a 4+ week injury. So I'm not expecting to see Kareem Hunt. I'm expecting a lot of Nick Chubb. We've talked about this. Steelers' run defense has been really bad for a while now. So this could be, if you're sitting 20 points back with Nick Chubb on Monday night, it could be fun. I think he could get you there.
Yeah, it's a great spot. It's a great spot for Nick Chubb. It's a fine spot for Jarvis Landry as well, who saw 10 targets, caught 5 for 65 in the first meeting. And it's also nice in this time where we don't know when guys are going to go on the COVID list. Nick Chubb and Jarvis Landry have already had their COVID bouts, so they should be good to go for Monday night. And, it's suddenly risky to wait for Monday night players, whereas it used to be like, all right, I got one more guy to go. This is going to be exciting. Now it's risky, but the risk is gone for those guys. They should be good to play in this game. So should Baker Mayfield, not somebody that you're using, but, getting him back can't hurt the offense unless he plays one of those, really bad Baker games, which he's capable of.
Yeah, I mean, like he did last week, right? So maybe he won't string 2 of them together. But, that Baker's performance last week and the Steelers' run defense, I think it's going to be super run-heavy game plan from Cleveland. I do think Jarvis Landry is still in play as a wide receiver 3. He has averaged 8.8 targets over his last 4 games now. So when they do go to the air, it's been a lot of Jarvis. So I think he's a decent option.
Mm-hmm. On the Pittsburgh side, Mike Tomlin says Pat Freiermuth has a shot to return from his concussion this week. Not a high-end option, I don't think, but an option. He's been decent for us. Chase Claypool has been short of decent. I mean, if you look, there are some games where you continue to see his upside, and it makes you wonder if you should play him. But there's been a lot more disappointing than good for Chase Claypool, and I would lean away from using him if I can help it this week.
Yeah, so would I. Claypool at least got back up to 82% snap rate last week. Actually led Ray McLeod in routes for the first time in like a month. But who knows when he's going to do something stupid again and get benched. But really, to me, it's just relying on anyone in this passing game outside of Deontay Johnson with the way Big Ben is playing. I don't know if you saw Big Ben basically said today this is going to be his last game at Heinz Field. So maybe they try to, maybe they give him 50 attempts and try to get him a big game. But, for me, it's just Deontay and Najee Harris on the Steelers side.
Yeah, and it does not help Chase Claypool that he has not had his bout with COVID yet. So there is, as I said, some added risk to waiting on a Monday player, especially somebody who's risky to begin with.
Yep.
Anything else from the Pittsburgh side?
No.
That's going to do it, folks. Do not go crazy overthinking your Week 17 decisions. If you're a DS insider, we are here to do most of that thinking for you. You can check out the tools that you've been relying on all season to help you set your lineup. Check back over the weekend so that you don't miss any updates. We, of course, will be tracking all of the COVID and injury situations to stay on top of the rankings, to move guys where needed. And if you can't decide on that last spot in your lineup, join the free Draft Sharks Discord to get a little more help. You can find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.